Hi, it's Jason here at the Centre for Computing History. This weekend is Synthesized, an event we hold every year, and it's getting bigger and better each year. This year it is on steroids. We have got some amazing machines here. We have a PPG Wave over there. We also have a Fairlight. Yes, I see the Fairlight, brought in by Rob Puricelli. Welcome to the event.
Thank you for having me.
So what have we got here?
Well, essentially we've got two Fairlight CMIs. Over on the other side we've got a semi-working CMI 2X. It's up and running, it's got the operating system going, but it's not making any noise at the moment, so that's unfortunate, but I thought it was nice to bring it to show.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
the system that we have up and running here is a rack-mounted version of the Series III CMI, which was the final version, and this is actually an MFX configuration, so it also has the 24-track digital hard disk recording feature as well.
Oh, right.
So it's a CMI plus hard disk recording all in this one unit here.
Wow. And I think this has some provenance as well, doesn't it?
This one actually came out of a studio in Auckland, New Zealand, called Marmalade Studios.
Right.
Not very popular over here, but many a hit record from New Zealand was made there, so I'm told.
Right, okay.
So yeah, that's where it came from originally.
Fantastic. And the other one has a label on it that says Ian?
Yeah, so this one's a bit of a Frankenstein at the moment. The keyboard has a sticker on it that says, "This belongs to Ian," and anybody that knows or follows my channel on YouTube or my blog knows that we restored and sold Ian Stanley of Tears for Fears Series 3, and that was his Series 3 keyboard. It's just kind of doubling up as a keyboard for the 2X at the moment, but there's no real history with this one that we know of at the moment.
Okay, cool. So tell us a little bit about the system. So this is the last in the line of the Fairlights.
It was the start of the end.
Right, okay.
So what happened with Fairlight is that after the advent of the Series 3, which is, say, the final version of the CMI, the music world was being flooded with cheaper, faster, better samplers. And so...
So what kind of year was this?
So the Series 3 was launched in '85, right. And within 3 or 4 years, we've had people like Emulator and Akai and Sonic and all of these other sampler manufacturers coming in, doing it cheaper and better. And so the Fairlight kind of fell out of favour with the music world. So
doing it cheaper?
Doing it a lot cheaper, yeah.
Better?
Better, more flexible in some cases.
Okay.
But
they weren't a Fairlight.
Indeed, exactly. It didn't have that sound.
There's a lot of cachet
indeed
associated with the system.
So what happened was that they started to concentrate on the post-production market and fitting these, especially now that they've got the hard disk recorder in them, they're being used for film and TV production. So that's why the rack mount version became quite popular towards the end of the life, because it was just going into studios and being routed through their equipment there.
So in '85, hard disk recording, that was pretty advanced,
well,
pretty much at this time.
It came a little while after. '85 was the Series 3, and then the
hard disk recording was added later.
A little after, yeah.
I was going to say, that's very early. Right.
But still, yeah, I mean, this is still a fairly advanced machine for its time.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Do you know anything about it from a technical point of view, like processors that it uses?
Yep.
And
so essentially you have two 6809 Motorola processors running the CPU, that's the main CPU, so that's running the software and the OS. Each of the voice cards, and there are 8 in this machine, and each of those is a stereo voice card. Each of those has its own 6809 Motorola processor to run the voice chips on that card. So the reason for that is that the voice cards on the Fairlight do real-time processing of effects and of filtering. So you need the processor on there to manage all of those tasks. So yeah, you've got 8 of those voice cards.
So rather than loading the main processor, which just wouldn't have came with that, you offload those jobs to it.
Exactly, and it's very similar to the way a computer works nowadays with a GPU on a graphics card. It takes over the hardcore work of that function. So this was a very similar sort of thing. This machine's currently running 8 meg of RAM, a whopping 8 meg. We can go up to 32, although with a standard set of RAM cards, we can only get 14. But we've actually developed, my colleague in Sydney, Peter, has developed a single card that can carry a 32 megabyte DIMM chip, and that then just wipes out all the other cards, and you just have that in there. It's a lot easier to run.
Fantastic.
And then this has been upgraded with the Turbo SCSI and a device called the Waveform Supervisor, which just makes the whole sample data to disk and back again process more efficient. So it's fairly top of the line as far as one of these is concerned.
Indeed, indeed. That's fantastic. So what does she sound like?
She sounds pretty good once we get her going. So we've had a few problems with this machine. I was a little bit concerned that we might not get this machine here for you this week because the power supply here decided to go bang in a rather unpleasant way a couple of weeks ago.
Was it smoky and smelly?
No, thankfully it was literally just a very loud pop.
Okay.
And the 5-volt power rail to the digital side of the machine just died.
Right, so voltage regulator gone or something like that?
Yeah, well, I'm not very au fait with power supplies, so because of that, we had to ship another one of these bottom halves over from Sydney. So we've gone to great expense to get this machine here to you today. So
well, we really appreciate it.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. So I guess when we talk about the Fairlight, there are some obviously classic sounds, and most of those sounds originated from the Series 2 machine, but we do have them here in the Series 3. Now, I just want to point out that this isn't genuine Fairlight at all. We don't have a Series 3 keyboard for this machine, so I've just had to bring in my trusty Alesis Fusion here to work as a controller.
Sure, yeah. It's the vocal sound everybody knows and loves.
Indeed, and there's just a little bit of... We've got a slightly dodgy voice card on this machine, so there's a little bit of... That's a bit better. So, yeah, that's called Sarah or Sarah. It had different names.
Right.
But basically, it was a lady called Sarah Cohen in 1981 who was booked into the studio in Sydney, and she just sang a single note.
Right.
And then it was just spread across the keyboard and became this kind of very famous Fairlight sound. And of course, the other famous Fairlight sound, which we couldn't
oh yes,
couldn't do without once it's loaded.
Orchestra Stab 5.
And
Fantastic.
of course, that has a very interesting history as well. But yeah, so that was actually the opening part of a Stravinsky Firebird suite.
Right.
There's a part where it opens with this big crescendo of this massive chord, and whilst Peter Vogel was testing sampling, he just dropped this record on, sampled that bit, and it just became history, you know. So
it's interesting because it is a sampler. So the thing is, so back in the day, sort of early 90s, I was creating sample libraries for some of those horrible machines that come later, like the Akai's, the Casio FZ10 I was doing a lot of sample libraries for. And I was sampling samples of this machine. So I wasn't even sampling the machine. I never had access to a Fairlight. It wasn't going to happen. But I found some other discs and took those. An Orc 5 was one that I put out on the FZ, which was probably illegal. I never really did it honest. But you know, these things just then ended up all over there. They were so iconic.
Well, back in the day, it was a very incestuous environment, and there was no legal precedent. So nobody had sued anyone. Nobody had said you can't do that or you can do this. And so it just became incredibly incestuous. And you know, going through even this library here. So, for example, if I just load up this sound, and I'm not sure if you can get a shot of the title here, but as you can see, this.
We'll keep it as a surprise.
Yeah, it clearly didn't originate on the Fairlight, but.
You've got that synclavier sound.
And that's a synclavier. So, you know, everyone was sampling everyone else.
Yeah, well, that's what it was about.
Yeah,
sampling,
if you look at the emulator library, there are samples in there clearly from the Fairlight. And similarly, there are samples from emulators and synclaviers until things got very legally messy and then everyone had to start behaving.
Yeah, I got a letter from Yamaha at one point. But so, I mean, the whole range of sounds that were on the Fairlights, they ended up in a number of tracks and that just made them, you know, iconic.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know who had a Fairlight at the time that was, you know, really putting it out there, that was making the big hits at the time?
Well, so, I mean, there are so many, and it's not necessarily those that owned it, because most major studios either had one or had access to someone who had one. So there are guys like Andy Richards and Blue Weaver who set themselves up. They were proficient, professional keyboard players, session players, but they took the time to learn the machine and build a rig. And then if somebody wanted a Fairlight, you know, whether it's sound or sequencing, you'd give Andy a call, he would charge a daily rate, and you'd go out and work with him. So the amount of people, but then there were, you know, people like the Pet Shop Boys, you know, owned the machines, and artists like Peter Gabriel, Kate Bush, you know, all of those obvious ones, they owned the machines and did some amazing things with them. You know, Peter Gabriel is probably the one that always springs to mind, because he was almost, he was in at pretty much the ground level and began using the Series 1 Fairlights and just creating all sorts of unheard of or previously unheard of musical sounds from everyday objects. There's the famous clip from the South Bank show where he's smashing a television set or banging a piece of scaffold, and then he takes it back into the studio and builds a loop out of it, or makes a chromatic sound from it on the keyboard. So those are the kinds of people that, for me, push the envelope. Kate Bush as well was very very famous for that too. So it's not just the sound of the sounds of the samples that were in there and the quality of the sampler and what it did to those sounds, because certainly with the Series 2 being an 8-bit machine and using those filters to get rid of the aliasing in the samples, it gave it a character, it gave it a crunchiness, a lo-fi quality. But with the Series 3 being 16-bit, it was very clear, it was very nice sounding, which wasn't wonderful. So with the Series 2 machine, the sounds were quite unique. I think J.J. Jexalek of The Art of Noise said it's like taking a Polaroid picture. It looks like the thing you've taken a picture of, but it's a little bit rough around the edges. And that's exactly what it was sonically.
And it has a Polaroid feel.
Exactly.
This has a Fairlight feel.
This has, even the Series 3 was a lot cleaner, 16-bit sampling, but it still has a big bottom end to it. There is a sound. But the other thing is the sequencing. So with the Series 2, we had Page R, which is an 8-track monophonic sequencer. That was lost when we had the Series 3 because we all went polyphonic and multi-track and lots more tracks. So the sound shaped the sound of the 80s, I guess, but also the sequencing had this, you listen to a track and you can hear the sequencing, and that was all down to the Fairlight as well.
Fantastic. So what other sounds can we dig out of this?
Let's see what we've got. So
the trouble is we've only got the mics on at the minute, so you're only going to hear them through those mics, but they sound fantastic when you're right in front of the speakers.
And the other thing you have to get used to with these machines is that, unlike modern day machines where it's just drag and drop or double click and it's there is a waiting time. So we have to wait for these things to open, and it can sometimes get a little tedious, but you soon learn to unlearn your ways.
But these are coming from a SCSI drive internally?
No, they're coming from a micro SD card.
Oh, right,
and this
okay,
is
you
one of
replace that drive
the innovations that has sprung up over the last few years. So you can take a small card, run a SCSI interface into it, and then just use a micro SD card.
Yeah, we use that sort of thing on machines here quite a lot.
It's a lot cheaper.
Quite often there's more high-end electronics on those little cards than there is in the machine themselves.
Exactly, yeah. And with the Series 2 machines, we use the floppy disk emulators as well. So we get rid of those clunky, unreliable 8-inch floppy disk drives, and we can replace it with just
USB
an
stick
SD card.
Yeah, right. Yep. So let's talk money. How much were these to buy at the time?
So Series 2, if you're talking UK, about £20,000 to £25,000, depending on your configuration.
Back then, that is.
Back then, this is in between 81 and 83.
Yeah.
When the Series 3 came out, we are looking in excess of £60,000 up to and around 100,000. Again, depending on the configurations. Some people would buy these with, maybe 4 meg of RAM. Some would buy it with a full 14. Some would have 4 voice cards, and some would have 8 voice cards. Some would go for the audio router, which outputs 24 discrete balanced channels rather than having all the cables coming out from individual channels. So, there are digital sampling options, analog sampling options. So, based on your configuration, the price could be anywhere between 60 and 100,000.
So that's the reason only people like Peter Gabriel had
pretty
them.
much. Yeah, pretty much. And that's the reason why, unfortunately, Fairlight Star began to fall towards the mid-80s and the end of the 80s, when the Japanese and the Americans were doing things a lot cheaper.
Yeah, absolutely. So did we find some sounds?
So we've got some nice big string sounds. The other thing that a lot of people don't realise with the Fairlight is that the sounds themselves are quite impressive, but you do need to feed some of this stuff through effects to get
processors.
the real,
the real
full kind of effect. But
That goes for quite a lot of the early samplers.
Yeah.
You know, they were a bit raw.
Exactly.
But then that's the character. That's what you
Yeah.
you want.
so let's see if where are we?
Yeah, it's not the drag and drop thing of today, is it?
It really isn't. No, and I found I've done some YouTube videos myself, and I sit there doing this, and I think I really should edit this stuff out because there's so much dead air between me, you know, finding.
But that's how it is. You're getting the full experience.
That's it. Of course, the thing with the Series 3 being 16-bit is it was the first time people had access to really good acoustic samples, you know, of things like.
Cello, no? So there were a lot of those kind of things. So sampling real instruments, and then with the idea of then replacing those real instruments with the sample. Did that happen much? Because I mean, to me, samplers come into their own when you were trying to create something completely new.
Exactly, and there was, you know, in the UK there was a big musicians' union thing at the time, certainly in the early 80s, where they saw the Fairlight as a threat. And it never happened because certainly the Series 2 became a machine that could sample string sounds or piano sounds or oboes and clarinets, but it never quite sounded like those things, and so they never really got replaced. And by the time the Series 3 came along, we were seeing lots more of these orchestral libraries and drum libraries and things like that. They still weren't replacing real musicians because you needed real musicians to give you the samples. So there never really was this this big fear of people being put out of a job. That never really happened, and still to this day hasn't. So I don't ever see it going away.
No, absolutely, and it is more that it's a blank canvas, isn't it? You know, you can record that sound. Well, I was always sampling something that didn't seem to have a great deal of rhythm, but pitch it down a couple of octaves. All of a sudden, there's rhythm to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Loop it, and you've got the bass fill, whatever it is you want to build from there.
And that's
and there's so much creativity comes from that, and the ideas of creating completely new soundscapes. That just weren't possible before.
And unfortunately, what sampling it got a bad rep because people starting. I mean, they heard things like 19 by Paul Hardcastle.
I was going to say that.
You know,
don't use that. That was an amazing track.
It was a great track, but he was taking audio clips of people talking and then doing stutter effects and rhythmic effects. And then you had people doing chipmunk effects and, you know, the high-pitched voices. And so it became a novelty thing. And I believe, again, it was Peter Gabriel that said that tracks like that set the whole art of sampling back at least a decade because people stopped making new, interesting sounds that had never been heard before and just started sampling, you know, fart noises or somebody just saying the word and then just stuttering it. So it just, thankfully, I think we're kind of seeing a new dawn in sampling now with granular sampling where people are taking, you know, bits of audio and then just breaking it right down to tiny little grains and then using the modern technology to stretch that out into big, lush, evolving pads and what have you. So I think sampling's becoming a bit more trendy again and a bit more unique. But these machines, this is where it all started. So.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's an incredible system. We really appreciate having it here as Synthesized. Appreciate that. Thank you very much for all the effort you've gone to. I know it's not been that painless.
It's been stressful.
Just quickly before we finished, you've got a VGA plug stuck in the end of that. Is that normal?
No, it's not a standard thing. It's something that was produced at a much later date, but it's an option that we provide to users because it means that you can use an LCD screen rather than the old small monochrome screens. There's also colour graphics in there as well, and that's part of the MFX upgrades that you could have on these machines. So the only unfortunate thing is that the VGA signal is slightly non-standard. So there are only certain monitors, such as this NEC,
multi-sync that
can cope with that. Otherwise, you get like the top and the bottom are cut off ever so slightly. But with the Series 2s, you don't have to have the classic, light pen monitor. You can just use, as we're using here today, one of your standard monitors because it outputs just a regular composite signal. So it'll just work on pretty much anything in modern day TV.
Great.
So so VGA was just kind of an upgrade that we offer. You don't have to have that, but it's there.
Yeah, makes it straightforward to use. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time for bringing it in and coming to the event and for taking the time to do this video. Really appreciate it. It's an amazing system. And if you want to leave it here, feel free.
Can I just get a plug in as well?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, go for it.
So I work for a guy called Peter Wilk in Sydney. I say work, I don't get paid for this really, I just do it out of the love of doing it.
A lot of us do that kind of work.
Indeed, yeah. But if anybody's ever interested in buying one or having one repaired or restored, then we can do that. And it's horizontalproductions.com.au. And get in touch with us through that, and we'll be able to point you in the right direction and take care of you.
Good stuff. Right, well, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
And
Cheers.
enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you.
Thanks.